Thank you, Representative Spiller. So, I mean, we talked about this some in State Affairs Committee last week, and we asked, what would happen in this situation. You said it'd be Mexico's business in this case where we'd be returning someone to Mexico. So, I mean, so what happens if a law enforcement officer takes an immigrant to a port of entry along the U.S.-Mexico border, the Texas-Mexico border, and the Mexican authorities say, no, you're not permitted to enter or re-enter our nation, whichever the case may be, then what?
Well, first of all, if that happens, hopefully it wouldn't, because we have memorandums of understanding with each of the 4 states. But if it would, that would certainly change the scope of the bill. Probably once that happened, there'd need to be an understanding between Texas and that particular state. But certainly I think that defeats the purpose of what we're trying to accomplish with this bill.
Well, it would defeat the purpose. I agree, which is why I'm trying to, with this amendment, simply provide a backup, if you will, to say that if that happens, the Texas law enforcement officer is directed to transfer that immigrant to federal authorities. I mean, what is the objection with handing off someone who is here unlawfully to the Department of Homeland Security? What is the downside of doing that?
I think the whole purpose is that that's not what we're trying to do. Someone got here illegally. If they wanted to go to a port of entry and come to the United States legally, they would have certainly that ability, that option. They chose to do something else. So that might be the default. That could happen in one or a few circumstances, but I don't want the bill to say that that's what has to happen. So that's the reason that I oppose the amendment. I get what you're trying to say here, and you make a very valid point. What if? And we've dealt with a lot of what ifs tonight. But I think I get the concern, but I'm opposed to that being in the bill.
Okay, well, so if it's not going to be in the bill, and a law enforcement officer returns an immigrant to port of entry, Mexico denies that person entry into their country, then what happens? I mean, what is the law enforcement officer then still responsible for doing something with that person, or is the person just kind of on their own and can go wherever they want? I mean, what happens in that case?
I'm not advised because of I don't know what the particular circumstances would be in that instance, so I can't answer that question.
Well, I think it's a really important question to answer because, and I heard you earlier tonight raise the issue of these agreements that the governor of Texas has with the governors of several Mexican states. But those agreements, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe those agreements were agreements that were adopted more than a year ago and related primarily to truck inspections, commercial truck inspections, and were frankly not anything particularly new that the Mexican governments were going to be doing, but they simply memorialized some responsibility on the part of the Mexican states to do a more robust job in inspecting commercial traffic coming over the international boundary. So I don't know why any of those agreements would have any bearing on this case, because this is a novel concept. I mean, this is new legislation that wasn't in effect, wasn't even contemplated, as far as I know, when those agreements were struck. So I don't know what impact those agreements are going to have on this very novel concept of law enforcement officers returning an immigrant to a port of entry.
Well, I've read those agreements. They deal with a lot more than trucking, and they deal with primarily with the commitment that the folks of that state, of each of those states, has made to the governor of Texas about that they will cooperate with regard to the enforcement of border security and help fight illegal trafficking back and forth. And so that's contained in those agreements. And so certainly I would think that they would continue with the spirit of cooperation and work with us as they have committed in those memorandums of understanding.
So if a person is immigrated from, say, Venezuela and has traveled north, crossed through Mexico, and then into Texas, you could agree that scenario happens fairly frequently right now, right?
Okay.
Okay. So, and then the Venezuelan immigrant is apprehended by Texas law enforcement and returned to a port of entry, say in Eagle Pass.
Right.
What if Mexico says this is not a citizen of Mexico? They're not legally authorized to be in Mexico. We are not going to take them. Don't you agree that that is a very real possibility?
Well, like I answered that earlier, I'm not advised. I can't tell you exactly what would happen in that particular circumstances. I just don't know. I feel confident
I don't know
that
either, which I think is why we need this amendment to say what is going to happen. I mean, because we don't know what's going to happen in that situation. So isn't it our responsibility to provide some clarity as to what should happen in that type of situation?
Oh, I think we'll have some clarity soon enough. But I can't answer your question, with the hypothetical that you pose based on the information that I have at this time.
Well, again, I think that this is, a very real situation that is going to arise very quickly if this bill becomes law. And I think we'd be doing our law enforcement officers, a great favor if we're going to give them all these new responsibilities and obligations under this law to at least provide as much direction and clarity as possible. That's all I'm trying to do with this amendment. And I think a handoff to the Department of Homeland Security is a responsible way to do that.
And I understand that and I respect that. I just don't necessarily think that this amendment needs to be in my bill, but thank you.
Thank you.